People think wealth is destroyed by obvious things: expensive cars, designer clothes, luxury watches, nights out that somehow turn into empty bank accounts. The visible stuff. The things people can point at and say, that's why he's broke. And yes, sometimes that's true. Bad spending habits can absolutely ruin your future. Lifestyle inflation is real. Trying to look rich before becoming rich is one of the fastest ways to stay stuck. People buy symbols of success instead of building the actual thing. They finance appearances and call it progress. They confuse looking successful with becoming secure. Most people know this. That's why so many videos talk about it. Stop buying coffee. Stop financing cars. Stop wasting money on things that don't matter. It's repeated so often that it almost feels like the full story. But I don't think it is. Because for most people, wealth doesn't die in the spending. It dies much earlier. It dies in hesitation, in overthinking, in waiting for the perfect time, in telling yourself you're being responsible when really you're just afraid. That's the wealth killer no one talks about. Not because it's hidden, but because it looks smart. It looks disciplined. It looks mature. It even sounds wise. You tell yourself you're just planning carefully. You say you want to make the right move. You convince yourself that caution is intelligence. But sometimes caution is just fear wearing expensive clothes. And the scary part is, it can take years to realize the difference. Because overthinking doesn't feel like self-sabotage, it feels like progress. You spend hours researching investments you never make. You watch videos about businesses you never start. You save posts about opportunities you never touch. You build plans so detailed they almost look like action. Almost. But your life doesn't change. Because information without movement is just entertainment. And some people spend years entertaining themselves with the idea of becoming wealthy. That's the trap. You feel productive because your mind is busy. But busy and moving are not the same thing. You can spend 10 years preparing to start and still be standing in the exact same place. That's the quiet danger of overthinking. It doesn't look like failure. It looks like someone trying. Someone figuring things out. Someone being smart. But underneath it all, it's still avoidance. And avoidance is expensive. More expensive than a bad car payment. More expensive than designer shoes. Because money lost can be earned back. Time cannot. That's the part people forget. Time is the real currency, not money. Money can return. Opportunities can come again. Skills can be learned later. But years do not come back. The years you spent waiting to invest, the years you spent saying you'd start next month, the years you spent thinking instead of building, those years are gone. And the older you get, the louder that truth becomes. Because regret gets heavier with age. At 20, delay feels harmless. At 30, it starts to feel expensive. At 40, it can feel like grief. Not because life is over, but because you can finally see how much of it was spent standing still. That realization hits people late at night. Not in meetings, not at parties, not in public, at 2 a.m. When everything is quiet, when there's no noise left to hide behind, that's when people start asking themselves uncomfortable questions. What if I had started earlier? What if I stopped waiting 5 years ago? What if the thing holding me back was never money, but me? That question hurts, because sometimes the biggest loss isn't financial, it's psychological. It's realizing you were capable the whole time. You just kept asking for permission from a future version of yourself that never arrived. You kept saying, once I'm more confident, once I know enough, once I have more saved, once I feel ready. But ready is a dangerous word, because ready is often just a moving target. You reach one level and suddenly your mind creates another requirement, then another, then another. You think readiness is a destination, but it's actually a defense mechanism. It protects you from risk. Because as long as you're preparing, you never have to be judged. You never have to fail publicly. You never have to look inexperienced. You never have to admit that maybe you're not special. You just have to start like everyone else did. That's what perfectionism really is. People dress it up nicely. They call it high standards. They call it discipline. They call it being detail-oriented, but most of the time, perfectionism is just fear with better branding. It's fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of being seen trying. Because trying means vulnerability. Trying means proof. Once you begin, reality replaces fantasy, and reality can be uncomfortable. Before you start, your business idea is perfect. Your side hustle is brilliant. Your future self is guaranteed. But once you act, things get messy. You make mistakes, you look average, You realize success is less cinematic and more repetitive. And for a lot of people, that's terrifying. So they stay in theory. Because theory protects the ego, reality tests it. That's why smart people often stay stuck longer. Not because they lack ability, because they can rationalize delay better than anyone else. They can explain why now isn't the right time, why the market isn't ideal, why they need one more certification, why they should wait until conditions improve. And every explanation sounds reasonable. That's what makes it dangerous. Stupid excuses are easy to reject. Smart excuses become a lifestyle. You start building an identity around potential instead of proof. People say, "You have so much potential." And secretly, that becomes a prison. Because potential is comfortable, potential asks for nothing. Reality demands work. Potential lets you imagine greatness without surviving mediocrity first. And nobody talks enough about that part, the middle. The awkward phase, the season where you are trying, but not impressive yet. That's where most people quit. Or worse, they never begin. Because they want the confidence before the action. But confidence doesn't come first. Confidence is a receipt. It comes after. After the bad attempts, after the awkward conversations, after the first failed launch, after the embarrassing beginner stage. People want certainty before movement, but movement is what creates certainty. You do not think your way into confidence. You act your way there. That applies to money too. People wait to feel financially secure before learning how to build wealth. But wealth is often built by people who moved before they felt safe. Not recklessly, not blindly, but courageously. There's a difference. Rich people are not always smarter. They are often just faster. They make decisions sooner. They accept imperfection sooner. They understand that clarity often comes from motion, not thought. They know that starting badly is still starting, and that matters. Because compound interest doesn't only apply to money, it applies to action. The earlier you start learning, the more your skills compound. The earlier you start investing, the more your money compounds. The earlier you start building discipline, the more your identity compounds. Tiny decisions repeated over years become entire lives. That's why hesitation is so expensive. It interrupts compounding. It delays momentum. It keeps you emotionally attached to a version of life you say you want, but never actually touch. And people underestimate how much momentum matters. Once you move, things change, not because the first step is magical, but because action creates information. You learn faster. You adapt faster. You stop relying on imagination and start working with evidence. That's powerful because fear thrives in uncertainty. The less you know, the bigger everything feels. The first conversation feels impossible. The first investment feels terrifying. The first attempt feels permanent. But after you do it, something strange happens. It becomes normal. Not easy. Normal. And normal things stop controlling you. That's why your first move matters so much. Not because it changes your bank account overnight, because it changes your identity. You stop being someone who is thinking about it. You become someone who moves. That shift is everything, because wealth is rarely built by one giant decision. It's built by identity. The kind of person who keeps promises to themselves. The kind of person who acts before motivation arrives. The kind of person who understands that discipline is often just boring consistency. People love dramatic transformations. They want the one big moment, the one investment, the one breakthrough, the one perfect strategy. But most wealth is built quietly, slowly. In habits no one applauds, in decisions nobody notices, in choosing long-term peace over short-term applause. And that requires something difficult. Patience, but patience is different from waiting. Waiting is passive. Patience is active. Waiting says, I'll start when life gives me permission. Patience says, I'll keep building even when results are slow. Those are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse them. They think delay is discipline. It isn't. Discipline often looks like uncomfortable movement. Sending the email, making the call, starting the project, opening the investment account, posting the first video, applying before you feel qualified, doing the thing your mind keeps turning into a monster. That's discipline. Not planning forever. Not collecting advice like trophies. Not building another perfect spreadsheet while your real life remains untouched. At some point, information becomes procrastination. And deep down, most people know exactly when that happens. They feel it. That quiet guilt, that voice saying, you already know enough. That's the moment. the uncomfortable truth. You are not confused, you are scared. And strangely, that realization can be freeing. Because if fear is the problem, then perfection was never the solution. Action was. Small action, imperfect action, embarrassing action. That's where lives change. Not in dramatic speeches, not in motivation videos. In ordinary Tuesday decisions. That's where wealth begins. People imagine rich people living in luxury. But real wealth often starts in silence, in private sacrifices, in boring repetition, in saying no when nobody would know if you said yes, in learning when nobody is watching, in consistency before validation. That part isn't glamorous, but it's real. And if your goal is peace, not performance, that matters more. Because a lot of people don't actually want wealth. They want the image of wealth. They want status. They want proof. They want people to see them differently. That's why they chase visible things. Cars, brands, luxury signals. But actual wealth is often invisible. It looks like options. Freedom, sleep, the ability to say no, the ability to leave bad environments, the ability to choose peace over panic. That kind of wealth is built differently. It requires long-term thinking, and long-term thinking requires emotional maturity. Because your emotions will constantly ask for shortcuts. Your ego wants immediate proof. Your insecurity wants visible rewards. Your fear wants endless preparation. But your future needs consistency. That battle happens every day. Quietly, nobody sees it. But it decides everything. Will you protect your image or your future? Will you choose temporary comfort or permanent change? Will you stay the person who dreams or become the person who moves? That choice repeats more than people realize. And most people don't lose because they chose badly once. They lose because they avoided choosing at all. That's the hidden cost of overthinking. Indecision feels safe, but indecision is still a decision. You are choosing delay. You are choosing stagnation. You are choosing to let life happen without your full participation. And years later, that choice collects interest too. Regret compounds. That might be the hardest truth of all. The pain is rarely failure, it's wondering. Wondering what would have happened if you started. If you trusted yourself earlier. If you stopped waiting for certainty. If you accepted being a beginner instead of worshiping the idea of being exceptional. That regret is heavy. Because there is no answer, only imagination. And imagination is cruel. It builds alternate lives in perfect detail. The business you could have built. The freedom you could have created. The confidence you could have developed. The version of yourself that existed on the other side of courage. You can't measure that loss. But you can feel it. Especially when life gets quiet. Especially when distractions disappear. Especially when you realize nobody was coming to save you. That moment changes people. Some people turn bitter. Others finally move. Because eventually, reality becomes louder than excuses. You realize the perfect time was never coming. No secret sign. No magical confidence. No guaranteed moment where fear disappears and certainty arrives. Just a choice. Move anyway. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not glamorous, not viral, not exciting. Just movement. Again and again. That's how people change their finances. That's how people change their lives. Not because they were fearless, because they stopped negotiating with fear. They stopped asking permission from a future version of themselves. They accepted that clarity would come later. And they started. Messy, uncertain, human. That's enough. It always was. You were never one perfect decision away from being rich. You were one honest decision away from becoming the kind of person who moves. The kind of person who trusts action more than anxiety. The kind of person who understands that progress is often ugly before it becomes impressive. The kind of person who stops treating time like it's unlimited. Because it isn't. That person builds wealth. Not overnight, not dramatically, but inevitably. And maybe that's the real lesson. The biggest wealth killer isn't spending too much, it's waiting too long. Waiting to begin. Waiting to believe in yourself. Waiting to become someone you were always capable of being. And if that truth feels uncomfortable, good. Because discomfort is often the first honest sign that change is close. Maybe tonight is the night you stop calling fear responsibility. Maybe tonight is the night you stop researching and start moving. Maybe tonight is the night you finally understand this. You do not need more time. You need less hesitation.